All right, Mr. Malberg, any questions for Mr. Flanagan?
Just very briefly, Your Honor. Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Flanagan. I have just a couple of questions about the generation of some of these maps, just really a point of clarification on these. In the legend of a number of these exhibits, BC 101 is an example if you want to pull it up. Down at the bottom in the first asterisk explanation there, it says that these are digitized from, it gives a title, and then document 432. Is that document 432 a reference to the PSC docket number?
Yeah. Well, the PDF map was titled Figure 4. Overview of a map of preferred route and southern alternative route from Summit Carbon Solutions, Bismarck Analysis, document 432. I can assert on the document 432, it was just the map entitled Figure 4.
And I guess that's the same Doc 432 label is at the top of BC 106.
Figure 4.
Go to the cover, Mr. Flanagan, turn back one page, go to the cover page.
Oh, Doc 432?
Yes. Okay. All of these maps were prepared at your direction by the GIS department, right?
Yes, I requested Greg Carlson to produce these maps based on the only information that was available to it.
Yeah, so you selected the generic map that would be used by GIS, your GIS department, to come up with this whole series of maps, right?
Correct.
And you chose this generic map that was from January of 2024. You chose not to use more detailed map pages that do have things like landowner names and a route, and that were filed some all the way back in October of 2023, right?
We referenced what was the only map that was provided by Summit Carbon Solutions, but we also referenced the easements that were recorded to further document the location of the pipeline.
Mr. Flanagan, when you say the only map that was provided by Summit Carbon Solutions, as I understand it, you're monitoring the docket and deciding which map to send to your GIS department, right?
This is the only map that I had available, that was made available to Burleigh County.
So if there were other, let me back up. Where'd you get the map from? The map was from, I believe, we got it from the first one of the hearings that was submitted to the PSC as a document. So to the extent that there were more detailed documents available, such as on the PSC's docket at any point in time, you weren't looking for that level of detail in your maps.
Object for lack of foundation compound.
I don't know that it was, but maybe you could rephrase your question.
Yeah, Mr. Flanagan, not trying to trick up. I'm trying to find the source of where you went looking to get the most detailed maps possible, because that would be helpful, I think, when you're producing your maps. So where did you go to look for your maps?
We looked at what was provided by Summit Carbon Solutions to this council here. We also looked at the recorded easements that were signed by the landowners.
So you looked at the entirety of the Public Service Commission's publicly available docket.
Yes,
And you didn't find any more detail than this one figure 4 that you chose to use to have these maps made?
correct?
Do you control the content of what goes up on the Burley County Planning and Zoning Commission's website?
Yes,
So where there is, for example, a post from a filing made by Summit Carbon Solutions of route modifications, including maps at the end of the document, that was filed with the PSC months ahead of this generic document, you were the one who had that posted on the website, right?
I'd have to look at the posting on the website, but yeah.
Sure. And maybe it's a good idea to do that. You'll find the maps, including a Bismarck reroute maps with things like the parcels, the routes, the landowner names, the section township range, all the sorts of information that, if I understood some of the questioning, you said was lacking.
At the very beginning, yes.
I mean, what?
We feel that these maps are accurate. We feel they're backed up by the easements, the documentation of those easements and the recording of them, and also the information that we had.
So you were able, with the information that you had and the easements that you found, to determine where the route was to your satisfaction.
Correct.
So the public was aware of where the route was, right?
Correct.
Okay. I don't have anything else. Thank you.
Mr. Pelham, any questions?
No questions, thank you.
Mr. Jordy, did you have any questions?
I do not, thank you.
Commissioner Chrisman?
Thank you. Would you go to BC 101, please? Okay, and as we go, I just want to make sure that I understand what these various areas mean and how they come to be and for the whole rest of this case. So when we look at the Bismarck ETA, I understand what a city limit is. Who gets to vote in the city elections? Just people in the city limits, correct?
Correct.
People in the ETA do not get to vote for mayor and city commissioners, correct?
Correct.
Okay, and if I were an ag producer outside of city limits but inside of the ETA, do I have any say over whether I get into the ETA or not?
No.
So that's a city commission decision to set the ETA line or a county commission decision?
It's the city's decision to extend their ETA line based on their population.
Okay, can you give me an example or two? Again, if I were an ag producer outside of city limits but inside the ETA, what might be some things that I have to do or that I can no longer do that I could if I was not in the ETA?
Not much difference. Our zoning, you're under the zoning jurisdiction of the city of Bismarck. Our zoning regulations are very similar to the city of Bismarck, so there's not much difference that you could do within the ETA and within the county.
If I wanted to build a new house on my farm, I'd need zoning approval from Bismarck.
Correct.
Okay, then when we jump to the 4-mile buffer, who sets that?
That is also set by the population of the city. The city does not choose to extend out to the 4-mile at this time. They have no intention of doing, according to their planning department, their future land use map.
But the buffer, because I mean, the city limits are not a perfect circle.
Right.
So I see sometimes on the map here where it's 0.99 miles to the ETA, and then it's 1.19, and then it's 1.9. So that line on the map, that's drawn by the city of Bismarck or the county?
Well, we produced this to show that 4 mile buffer of where the city could, if they wanted to, extend their ETA. They
Oh,
choose
so
not to.
Is there a law that only allows them to do the ETA up to 4 miles?
Yes, it's
Okay,
Century
and-
Code.
Okay, and so then the 4 mile buffer would be where they could put it if they wanted to max it out.
That's their, yes.
And is there, the people that live outside of the ETA but inside the 4 mile buffer, do they fall under city zoning rules?
No,
Okay, and either one of those, either specific to the people in the ETA or all the way to the 4 mile buffer. I think you said something real early on about either fire or police protection or both. Do they get those services, but people further out do not?
no, the city police and their fire stops at the city limits.
Okay.
The joint jurisdictional agreement, it allows the sheriff department to, and rural fire to protect, the ETA and that 4 mile buffer area.
Okay, thanks for explaining all this.
Commissioner Haugen Hoffert?
I was just looking at that, where I can have the best shenanigans at, and not get caught. No. My question, Mitch, thank you for explaining how the maps were developed. Have you done any comparison in our docket on the maps that have been submitted by Summit Carbon to your maps that you developed?
I'd have to talk with Greg on that.
Okay,
I'd have to ask Greg.
okay. I have no further questions. Thank you.
Mr. Dawson?
One question. Are you here today under some official action of the county commission? Or a couple times you said that you were saying the county is concerned, and I'm just trying to figure out, is that your own personal concern, or is that concern based upon common sense, or is that concern based upon direction from the county commission?
It's based on the last 2 years of creating ordinances and resolutions to protect the people of Burleigh County. Way back in 2022, they created a resolution. They adopted a resolution opposing eminent domain. And they've adopted several ordinances on the pipeline, trying to protect the people of Burleigh County. That was unanimously adopted. This was attended by many hundreds of people over the years. So there are concerns for the Burleigh County Commission because they're in front of them. They're the ones that were in front of them. And they're at the hearings, during the adoptions, the whole thing. So I'm not representing those people. I was the one that wrote those ordinances, and we held the public hearings for them.
Thank you. No further questions.
Any redirect, Mr. Bakke?
Just briefly, Your Honor, in relation to the map, for instance, BC 101, where you show that original pipeline route, that is something that your department had prepared previously. In other words, the precise location of the original route, and you had provided a map which was Exhibit Warford 139. So that portion showing the original route had previously been done by your department and discussed by you at the prior hearings, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And so in terms of the original route versus the reroute location, you already had the precise location of the original route available to you already, correct?
Correct.
And what you had to plot in there was the reroute location based on GIS, including the easement data that you were able to locate.
Yes,
Okay. And that's one of the ways you determine that the location shown on Exhibit BC 101 and the other maps that you testified about here today are accurate and reliable, correct?
correct.
Okay. Then in terms of this ETA limit issue, you mentioned the North Dakota Century Code, and does the Century Code define the buffer location based upon the population size of a city in North Dakota? Is that your understanding?
Correct.
In other words, if you have a population of 10,000 people, it's going to be a shorter buffer zone than if you have 100,000 people.
Yes, correct.
And so if the population grows for the Bismarck area as it has been, that ETA could get extended further in each direction, north, south, east, depending upon population growth.
Correct. They could extend their ETA, their current ETA out to that 4-mile buffer line right now, if they wanted to. They choose not to.
That's all I have. Thank you.
Mr. Malberg, any other questions?
No, Your Honor, thank you.
Mr. Pelham?
No, Your Honor.
Mr. Jordy?
No, thank you.
Any other Commissioner Chrisman?
In response to Mr. Dawson's question, did you say Burleigh County or Bismarck has the proclamation or whatever opposing eminent domain?
Burleigh County adopted that resolution.
Burleigh County. How long have you been with Burleigh County?
I started in 2019.
So are you aware of, even maybe something that you heard of beforehand, ever historically where Burleigh County or Bismarck has used eminent domain?
I'm not aware of it, except for your right-of-ways, your section line right-of-ways and that sort of thing.
Well, that would be eminent domain, wouldn't it, if you needed more to widen a road or a street and the landowners refused?
It's established by that statutory right-of-way has already established. The extra 42 feet. I'm not sure that would be called eminent domain. But it's. Yeah, I'm not sure if it would be called eminent domain. It's for development of those roads.
Refresh me, I'm not sure where 42 feet comes from. I thought like a section line, there's an access 33 feet on each side of the center of the section line.
Correct.
But if you want to upgrade the road and need more right of way, you have to acquire that property, either an easement or ownership, correct?
Correct.
And if the landowner refuses to sell it,
We have to pay them for it.
but if they refuse to sell it at any price, that would require eminent domain, wouldn't it?
Correct.
And
I
so-
believe it wasn't opposed to all eminent domain. I think it was eminent domain used for hazardous liquid pipelines.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that.
Commissioner Hagenhofer?
No further questions.
Mr. Dawson?
No more.
All right, thank you, Mr. Flanagan. Next witness?
Your Honor, we'll call Mary Singer.
Good morning. I'll have you start by stating your full name for the record and spelling your last name.
Sure. Mary Senger, Senger.
And Ms. Singer, were you in the room this morning when I went through the penalties for perjury?
I was not.
All right, required by law to advise you on the penalties for perjury. Perjury is a Class C felony, punishable by a maximum fine of $10,000, a maximum 5 years imprisonment, or both. Do you understand what perjury is?
Yes.
And being advised of the potential penalties for perjury, do you promise to tell the truth in this case today?
Yes.
All right, thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Bakke.
Thank you, Your Honor. Could you state your full name for the record, please?
Mary Sanger.
And are you employed by Burley County?
Yes,
Okay, and what is your job position with Burley County?
Emergency Management Director.
And I know this is a bit awkward because you're looking to your left at me, but is there a way to pull the microphone
Oh, sure.
a little bit closer to you? Thank you.
If you want to turn towards him too, I think that'd be fine.
And how long have you been the Emergency Management Director?
2000.
So 24 years. How long have you worked for Burley County?
February of 91.
And are you also the Emergency Manager Director for Emmons County?
Yes,
And how long have you held that position?
Winter of 99.
And continuously since that time?
Yes.
And I want to talk to you about some meetings where Summit presented information to Burley County. Were you present at one or more meetings where Summit presented information in relation to the Summit pipeline to Burley County?
Yes.
How did those meetings come about?
Usually a phone call conversation and followed up by an email.
And how many meetings did you attend with Summit?
3.
Okay, so let's approach them one by one and start with the first meeting, the earliest meeting. When did you attend the first meeting?
June of 22.
And where was that meeting at?
That was at my workplace.
At Burley County?
Yep.
And which location at Burley County?
4200 Coleman Street.
Okay. Where the Burley County office is?
Yes.
And who was present at that meeting for Summit?
Rod Dillon, Jay Volk, and Cody Matson, the former Morton County Emergency Manager.
And how long did that meeting last?
I believe an hour and a half.
And did anyone else attend the meeting other than the 3 individuals you identified from Summit and you?
No.
And did Summit request that meeting?
Yes.
And did you receive a invite to that meeting?
That was, I believe, all arranged through phone conversations.
And I'm going to direct your attention to the Burley County exhibit. That's the binder in front of you, the black one. If you could look at exhibit BC 114. Is that an email you received with some attached maps provided by Mr. Dillon of Summit on June 14, 2022?
Yes, this was after our meeting.
Okay. Your Honor, will offer BC 114.
Any objection to 114?
No objection, Your Honor.
Mr. Fallon?
No objection.
EC 114 is received.
So turning back to the meeting in June of 2022, what was discussed at that meeting by Summit?
It was just very introductory. They talked about the project, future training and exercises with our responders, and potential equipment need, like gas monitors that the fire departments might need.
Did they provide any specific details regarding the proposed Summit pipeline?
they did explain it would be a 24-inch pipe, 4 feet, buried 4 feet, 2,000 PSI. That's all I recall.
Did they provide any either written or oral information regarding the safety or health risks related to CO2 exposure?
That I don't recall.
Did they provide anything to Burley County at that time in relation to how a CO2 leak should be responded to or handled by emergency personnel?
No.
They provide any information that was specific to Burley County in relation to how a leak might affect Burley County or the city of Bismarck in terms of wind conditions or plumes of CO2 or any information in that regard?
No.
And was there any discussion at that meeting as to any specific first responder or emergency management procedures that should be followed in relation to a CO2 leak from the Summit pipeline?
Only procedures discussed was that they would be providing us with a specific emergency response plan after the project had started.
And then, was there any time after that in June of 2022 when Summit followed up with you in relation to emergency management procedures or first responders procedure other than the letter with the maps, which has been identified as BC 114?
No.
So prior to August 4, 2023, were there any communications of any type by Summit with you as the emergency management director for Burley County in relation to the Summit pipeline?
Aside from the phone calls to set up this meeting, that was my only interaction with Summit.
So let's fast forward then to after August 4, 2023, when the PSC decision was issued. When was your next contact with Summit?
That was to set up a first responder information meeting. Discussions were started, I believe, in November.
Okay, and how did that come about?
That was some phone conversations and emails with Dave Naring.
Okay, and would you look at Burley County 115, please? Do you have that in front of you?
Yes.
Okay. Is this a series of email or an email string with Rod Dillon, the Director of Regulatory Compliance with Summit?
Yes.
Okay. So were those communications actually with Mr. Dillon as opposed to Mr. Nearing leading up to that meeting?
Yes.
Or at least these, the ones I've shown you. Okay. We'll offer BC 115.
Any objection to 115, Mr. Glut?
No, Your Honor.
Mr. Pelham?
No objection.
115 is received.
Okay. So let's turn to the back of that email, which would be the earliest email, and that's an email from Mr. Dillon to you, dated October 31, 2023, and he's asking about the LEPC meeting schedule. What is LEPC?
Local Emergency Planning Committee.
says, please advise when the next LEPC meeting will be for Burley and Emmons County. I would like an invite to update you and first responder on the dispersion modeling grants, training plans, correct?
Yes,
And then the email string progresses from there, where you're talking about times and some of the mechanical procedures in relation to that next local emergency planning committee meeting for Burley and Emmons County.
correct.
Okay, and then let's turn to Exhibit 116. Is that a series of emails that you had in regards to that proposed LEPC discussion or some other discussion with Summit?
Yes, the date of the LEPC meeting didn't work out with them, so we just, worked on a time for, first responders.
And is that what Burley County 116 is, as well as what appears to be some sort of or is identified as an agenda as the last page of that document?
Yes,
Okay, we'll offer BC 116.
Any objection, Mr. Glut?
No objection, Your Honor.
Mr. Pelham?
No objection.
116 is received.
Okay, and then in relation to the last page of BC 116, which is entitled Pipeline Information Session for First Responders, and it has a time of 5 p.m., November 27, 2023. How did that agenda come about?
this was back and forth, dialogue, and I received, some topics or a rough agenda, and so I put a more formalized agenda together.
Okay, Summit didn't do that, that was done by you?
Correct.
Okay, and then did they adopt it and publish it or put it on their letterhead?
No, I grabbed the logo from one of the emails, but I did get approval on the agenda to send it to the first responders from Summit.
And that agenda that you sent out to the first responders and that Summit approved does not indicate that any of the information on that agenda or to be discussed is in any way confidential or protected security information or anything of that nature. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. And Summit approved this.
Yes.
Okay, so this talks about a meeting on November 27, 2023. Did you attend that meeting?
Yes.
Okay. And where was that meeting at?
It was at the Bismarck State College National Energy Center for Excellence facility.
And who selected that location?
Summit.
Okay, and what happened at that meeting?
We, followed the agenda. There was some monitors set up. The meeting room was set up in a square like this, and the monitors were in the middle, and they went through their presentation for the first responders.
So when you say monitors, are these like computer monitors, like like we might see here in the courtroom for the attorneys for Summit, computer monitors so you could look at a small screen?
Yes, but they were not that big.
Okay, okay. And could you see very well what they were trying to present?
There were a lot of slides that had narrative on the slides that we couldn't read. Or you had to be really, really close.
And was this a slideshow type presentation?
All PowerPoint presentation.
Was it a two-dimensional presentation?
From what I recall, yes.
And then directing you to the information that they were providing, did they have different individuals who were talking about different topics at the November 27 meeting?
Alex Lang was the primary presenter, and when questions were asked, he deferred to other staff members.
And was Mr. Lang the individual talking about what they were calling dispersion modeling?
Yes.
Was there any real-time presentation provided by Summit in terms of dispersion modeling?
Not that I recall.
Okay. Or any video that showed dispersion modeling information, such as a simulation or a test or that type of thing to show what would happen if there was a failure of the CO2 pipeline and a CO2 leak?
I don't believe there was real-time simulation. I just recall pictures, charts, graphs.
As part of the PowerPoint
Yes.
presentation? Okay. And did you take notes at that presentation by Summit on November 27?
I did.
Okay. Is that what has been marked as Burleigh County 117?
Yes.
And then did you actually type up those notes after you got back to Burleigh County?
Yes, I did.
Okay, and is that the second page of Burleigh
Yes.
County 117? I'm sorry, I didn't hear your answer.
Yes.
Okay. And is there a typo on the second page where it says November 7? Should that be November 27 instead?
Yes.
Okay. Your Honor, we'll offer Exhibit BC 117.
Any objection to 117, Mr. Gillette?
Your Honor, ma'am, just photo hire the witness real quick to learn a little bit more about these notes.
Sure.
Ms. Stringer, were these notes taken based off the PowerPoint presentation that was being spoken to and presented at that meeting?
PowerPoint and discussion.
Okay, and at the beginning of that meeting, did Alex Lane or anybody from Summit advise you that this information was confidential?
I don't know if he said confidential or secure, but these were my notes.
And do you recall any information within the PowerPoint itself noting or denoting confidentiality?
That I don't recall.
Your Honor, we're going to maintain our objection that this goes to the PowerPoint presentation that was submitted to the PSC under the protective order, and this information should not be discussed or alluded to based on that protective order.
Mr. Pelham?
The protective order is a protective order, and unless that changes, that's the order of the commission.
Do you agree that this falls, the information contained therein would fall under? I mean, the protective order is the modeling and what's been submitted to the commission.
Quite frankly, we've heard a lot about this dispersion modeling already, so without objection. So I'm not sure what testimony that would be received from this witness would differ from prior witnesses that have already been examined without the objection. So I don't know, because there hasn't been a question asked as to this witness as to the specifics on the dispersion modeling. But to the extent that there would be questions that relate specifics to the dispersion modeling, I would think that that would probably fall within the protective order of the commission as to this specific case. But we haven't heard those questions yet.
All right, I will note Summit's objection, but I will admit 117.
Okay, while you were at the summit meeting, would it be correct to say that you were taking these notes as the presentation progressed?
Correct,
Nobody directed you not to take your own personal notes, did they?
correct.
Okay. And if we look at the notes, it talks about a number of topics, an emergency response plan that we'll get to later. It talks about a high consequence population, and then you have an identification under PHMSA of what a high consequence population is, the link to go to, correct?
Mm-hmm. Correct.
And then you talk about a UK study. Is that something done in the United Kingdom as opposed to by Summit?
Yes,
Okay, so were they providing information on a study in the United Kingdom
yes.
involving a carbon dioxide pipeline?
Your Honor, we're presumably this information came directly from the PowerPoint presentation, which is subject to our protective order. And now we are talking about the information in the PowerPoint presentation. So we've reached the threshold of the question being asked now.
Your Honor, this is a dispersion model from the United Kingdom, not something prepared by Summit. I don't know how that could possibly be claimed to be the work product or confidential to Summit when it's from a completely different location in country. I mean, I don't follow that objection at all. None of these notes reflect any specific plume model or dispersion modeling being done by Summit. They're talking about one that was done in the United Kingdom.
Your Honor, they reflect the content of the PowerPoint presentation, which is under the protective order. I mean, we allowed a line of questioning yesterday up to a certain point, and it stopped when it got a little too detailed, and we're at the same point here today. We're going into the details of what was in that PowerPoint presentation. And, frankly, someone's been asked and is required to go around and have these meetings and advises folks on the confidential nature of these meetings. And we're expected to continue those meetings. And now we have a witness up here that's going to openly talk about it. And I think if there's trust lost between Summit and Berkeley County, this is certainly a reason why.
Your Honor, could I suggest a resolution and then I can move on?
Sure.
If Summit will stipulate that what happened at this meeting was that they presented some information on a dispersion model from the United Kingdom, not on the Summit pipeline, we can move on. I don't need to ask any further questions about this document.
This information was from our slide deck. It was presented to the commission via an application for a protective order. Presumably commission staff and the commission got to see this and ruled that this information was protected information.
So you're not willing to stipulate that the UK modeling was discussed?
Your Honor, no, it's out of context and it's not complete.
Mr. Bakke, can you address the relevance of going into the detail of what was discussed at this meeting? I mean, I think we're circling back to the discussion we had yesterday that, the commission's concerns is that these conversations are having and that safety is being addressed, but ultimately they don't have jurisdiction over the safety guidelines themselves.
Sure, I understand. I think this is different than yesterday in the respect that this is Burleigh County witnesses, not Summit. An agenda was published for this meeting with the approval and after review by Summit, indicating that the agenda items were not in any way confidential, was not subject to security laws. And the important point of this is her notes established that what they presented was not a dispersion model for the Summit pipeline at all, but rather was a dispersion model from another country, the United Kingdom. And therefore, they haven't done a dispersion model for the Summit pipeline, and specifically have not done one that would be relevant to the concerns that Burleigh County has, in relation to being very close to the city of Bismarck and very close to existing rural housing developments and farms and ranches and residences of people, and that whatever they did in terms of a plume study was not what they're suggesting it was, because she was there and it related to the United Kingdom. That's our point. That's the relevance.
Mr. Pelham?
I think that there's no question that dispersion modeling has been done. It's been provided to the commission and it's subject to a protective order. The relevance that we're getting into, and which has been established, there's been meetings between Summit Carbon Solutions and Burleigh County Emergency Department, the specifics of which the commission does not have just the jurisdiction to decide one way or the other on. That it is being done is the important relevant purpose. There has been prior testimony from the company in prior proceedings that it will provide an emergency response plan. It's required to do that under PHMSA. That is what the commission is looking at. So the line of inquiry going further down to the specifics and nitty-gritty of that, in addition to the confidential nature of the material that has already been determined by the commission to be protected information, I believe goes beyond the scope at this point.
Mr. Bakke, Ms. Singer can testify about generally that the information they received was not satisfactory to Burleigh County, but we're not going to get into the details because of the confidentiality order and the pending motion. Generally, she can testify that what was presented was not sufficient for Burleigh County, but the details of what was discussed, and that we're not going to get into.
Okay, I appreciate that instruction. I'll follow my questions to comport with that. So in relation to the information that was provided to you at the meeting with Summit on November 27, 2023, would it be accurate to say that the information provided by Summit was not sufficient in your estimation as the emergency management director for Burleigh County and Emmons County?
Correct.
Okay, and how was it insufficient or not sufficient?
We weren't provided the, any handouts or the specific locations of the route or a final route.
Did they provide any written materials of any type?
No.
Okay. Were you interested in receiving written materials that would talk about the best practices or guidelines that should be followed in the event of a CO2 pipeline leak?
Yes, they did make reference to 2 guidelines that we requested and then the emergency response plan.
And the emergency response plan, that was not provided at this meeting on November 27 by Summit?
Correct.
Okay, your notes reflect that you did request an emergency response plan from Summit, and Rod Dillon said he would provide a draft version, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, and then following that meeting, well, let me ask you this. Was there a request made at the November 27, 2023 meeting that Burleigh County be allowed to have a copy of the slideshow presentation?
Yes.
Okay. And did Summit refuse that request?
Yes.
Okay. And who requested a copy of the slideshow presentation?
Commissioner Bittner, and I believe I did also.
And then who do you recall being present at that meeting, the November 27, 2023 meeting from Burleigh County, other than yourself and Commissioner Bittner?
Mitch Flanagan, the Sheriff's Department. And that was all for Burleigh County government employees. There were other first responder entities there.
So, following that, did Mr. Dom follow up and provide a copy of written materials, including information on the guidelines?
Yes.
And when did he follow up? Was it the day following the presentation on November 28?
Yes.
Okay, could you turn to Burleigh County 118? Is that a copy of the email from Mr. Don to you?
Yes.
Questions in 7 documents including
Correct.
cooperations.
Any objection to 118?
No objection, Your Honor.
Mr. Pelham?
Beyond what I've already stated as to the relevance as to the commission's limited jurisdiction related to safety, but I do not object to the admission of the exhibit. Thank you.
All right, 118 is received.
Identify the things.
He provided the tactical guidance document, indoor loading simulation, shelter in place, the link to the UK study, as well as a table. And actually 2 tactical guidance documents, and then reference the high-level emergency response plan is forthcoming.
Your Honor, if I could just ask Mr. Bakke to pull the microphone a little closer. We're having some trouble hearing over here.
Sure.
Thank you.
Okay, do you have in front of you Burleigh County 119?
Yes.
Okay. And is that one of the documents that was provided by Summit on November 28, 2023?
Yes.
And then the second document I would refer you to is Burleigh County 120. And is that also a document you were provided by Mr. Dom of Summit on November 28, 2023?
Yes.
Okay. So let's turn back to Burleigh County 119, the carbon dioxide emergency response tactical guidance document, and it says guidelines for preparedness and initial response to a pipeline release of carbon dioxide. It's dated August of 2023, correct?
Yes.
And it identifies the authors of that document, and who are those authors?
The American Petroleum Institute, the Liquid Energy Pipeline Association, and National Association of State Fire Marshals.
And did Summit indicate whether it believes that these guidelines, Exhibit 119, were guidelines that should be followed by Summit in relation to an emergency response to a carbon dioxide leak?
It was referenced in the presentation, so I believe the assumption was made that they were following this guidance.
Okay. And is that your understanding of why they provided it to you, is to provide reassurance to Burley County, including to you as the emergency management director, that they would in fact follow guidelines in relation to being prepared to address a carbon dioxide release from the Summit pipeline?
Yes.
And I don't want to go through this entire document, but if you look at this, there's many different topics addressed in here in relation to the guidelines to be followed to prepare for and be able to address a CO2 leak. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And it's got a table of contents. This isn't paginated, but the table of contents, if you could turn to that, it's about the 5th page in. But it covers a number of topics in relation to a CO2 pipeline leak, including emergency preparedness and plannings, gives information on exposure limits, training, response drills and exercises, dispersion modeling best practices, CO2 leak detection and identification, in terms of both physical identification, remote identification, supplemental identification methods, CO2 pipeline release response actions, emergency responder safety, real-time plume predictions and surveillance, air monitoring strategy, incident management, and many other topics, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And is it your understanding that Summit was representing it was going to follow all the guidelines on the topics identified in the table of contents, including the ones we just described?
Yes.
And then turning to Burley County 120, which is the other guidelines they provided to you, which is CTEH, entitled Indoor Carbon Dioxide Loading Following a Simulated Carbon Dioxide Pipeline Release. Also a document sponsored by American Petroleum Institute and by Denbury Inc. and E3 Environmental, correct?
Yes.
And that's dated June 7, 2023.
Yes.
And similarly, that has a table of contents starting on Roman numeral small IV and continuing on to VI. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And it also has some appendices, including.
Your Honor, we're all able to read the document. If Mr. Bakke has questions for the witness specific to the document, I'd ask that he ask them.
I'm trying to speed it up by just identifying the sections and whether or not they indicated and she understood that they would be following those guidelines. It would take me a lot longer to go through them item by item. So I'd prefer to do it very quickly if I could.
I have similar concerns that we're spending lots of time on these two documents when they're written and in front of us. So whatever you can do to speed this up, I think would be appropriate, Mr. Bakke.
Sure. And in relation to Appendix A, the health and safety measures and the health and safety plan, was it your understanding that the items identified in the table of contents, including the ones we discussed, were ones that Summit was representing it would comply with and follow in relation to the Summit pipeline?
Yes.
We'll offer exhibits 119 and 120.
Any objection, Mr. Glut?
No objection, Your Honor.
Mr. Pelham?
Other than my prior stated as to the relevance aspect, but no objection.
I will admit 119 and 120 and let the commission decide what relevance, if any, it gives to this type of evidence, given its limited jurisdiction, as has been previously noted.
During the discussion on November 27th at the Summit presentation, did anyone raise the issue in relation to the Satarsha, Mississippi CO2 leak?
Yes.
Okay. And what discussion was there in that regard?
Objection, Your Honor. I believe this comes from the discussion and the presentation that Summit made, which was based off our PowerPoint. We've discussed Satarsha many, many times. We don't need this witness to repeat the details and happenings of Satarsha.
And I'm not asking her to, I'm just asking what they said about it, Summit.
Again, what is the relevance? I mean, I think what Mr. Pelham has stated regarding the commission's jurisdiction of this particular issue is my understanding as well. So I feel like we're spending a lot of time on which is outside of the type of information the commission takes or is concerned with on this topic, given they do not have jurisdiction over much of this.
And what I'm trying to focus on is what the judge said we should focus on is emergency preparedness. But if you're telling me I can't ask questions about emergency preparedness,
Well, I have asked that you do it in a general nature, and I think we're way beyond that.
Well, if you say I can't ask about,
Yes, I'd ask that you please move on.
okay. And so then let's turn to the next contact with Summit. When was your next contact with Summit?
I believe I requested the emergency response plan.
Okay. And did you ultimately receive that?
Yes, I believe I got that in December.
Okay. And has that email with the attached draft emergency response plan, what has been marked as Burleigh County 121?
Yes.
Okay. And is that an email to you from Mr. Dom dated December 14, 2023?
Yes.
With a template attached that Mr. Dom called Summit North Dakota Emergency Response Plan?
Yes.
Okay. Your Honor, we'll offer exhibit Burleigh County 121.
Any objection to 121, Mr. Glut?
No, Your Honor.
Mr. Pelham?
No objection.
121 is received.
Okay, and the emergency response plan as part of BC 121, if you turn to the page of that document, which is entitled Emergency Response Tactic, is that just a boilerplate form?
Yes.
Okay. So for instance, it says map of area, photo of building, and there's nothing there.
Correct.
Okay. And then if you turn to the next page, Summit Carbon Solutions draft emergency response plan, that's dated August 28, 2023.
Yes.
Okay. And does that document also have draft generic information in it?
Yes.
Okay. So is it your understanding this is a draft only and it's not actually the emergency response plan by Summit for the Summit pipeline?
Correct.
Have you ever received anything other than a draft of the emergency response plan from Summit?
No.
And then turning back to the first page of Burley County Exhibit 121, if you look at the middle paragraph of the email to you from Mr. Dom, it says as follows, as mentioned in the meeting, we are not distributing the dispersion model presentation at this time. Anything in this presentation that is not discussed in the presence of a Summit employee could result in misinformation being conveyed. We are always happy to sit down and go through the presentation with yourself or any of the commissioners if needed. What was your reaction when you read that comment by Mr. Dom?
That anyone outside of Summit couldn't properly relay the information on the dispersion model.
Okay. And why had you requested a copy of the slideshow information, including any dispersion model information in the first instance?
To provide to the rest of the responders that weren't present at the meeting.
Okay. If you had the slideshow presentation, would that be helpful so that Burley County did not provide any quote unquote misinformation?
Yes.
In relation to the dispersion modeling information, as the emergency management director for Burley County, did you feel it was important for the public to be aware of that information?
Yes, as far as preparedness activities they would choose to do on their end.
Okay. And why did you think that was important?
We try and give them as much information as we can on the hazards in our area.
And when you say emergency preparedness by the public, do you mean prepare with whatever types of things they felt they might need in the event they had to confront a CO2 leak from the Summit pipeline?
Yes.
As the emergency management director, do you believe it's important for the public to be as prepared as possible and as knowledgeable as possible on how to confront a CO2 leak?
Yes.
In terms of training and equipment needed to respond to any CO2 leak, has Summit provided any training to date to Burley County, including first responders, on how to respond to a CO2 leak?
No.
Okay. Has Summit provided any equipment to the emergency management department or first responders in Burley County that would be needed to respond to a CO2 leak?
No.
Let's take a look at Burley County Exhibit 127. Can you tell us what that is?
This is an email from Rod Dillon, providing some information on a grant for or for Emmons County. And yeah, it's a digital copy of a letter announcing a grant that was sent out to all emergency managers.
Okay. And what would the grant entail?
The grant is $50,000 per county plus an additional $1,000 per mile of pipeline in the county.
And for what purpose, if you know?
To allocate funds based on the individual needs of the first responders along the route.
And then turning back to BC 122, is that an email to you from Mr. Dillon with an attached map?
Yes.
And that's dated December 18, 2023, and it's a revised Burleigh County route map to replace one submitted in 2022?
Yes.
Okay. We'll offer BC 122.
Any objection to 122, Mr. Glut?
No, Your Honor.
Mr. Pelham?
No objection.
122 is received.
And if we turn to the map there on the legend, it has what I guess I could describe as little red bow ties that are identified as the main line valve. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And what do you understand those to be?
The shut-off valves.
And this shows the ones that would be located in Burleigh County. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And how many are there shown in Burleigh County?
5.
So is that your understanding of the approximate location and number of mainline valves that Summit has indicated they will provide on the portion of the Summit pipeline in Burleigh County?
Yes.
In relation to, and also on that document, on the map, on the bottom right, it says preliminary route subject to change, correct?
Yes.
And in relation to mainline valves, or pipeline valves, whether it be CO2 or natural gas or oil, does Burleigh County have any policy in place in regards to operation of mainline valves for pipelines in Burleigh County?
It's generally the operator policy that our responders not touch the valves.
And is that the policy of Burleigh County as well?
We don't have that policy. It's training the responders receive not to touch the valves.
And why is that part of the training that first responders receive, not to touch the valve?
It's usually provided through an annual training through the North Dakota Pipeline Association. And the first responders don't have the training on the specific valves for each operator.
And so is the reason Burleigh County follows that policy is they don't know the operation of those valves and don't have knowledge on how touching or adjusting or shutting on or off a valve might affect the operation of that pipeline?
To my knowledge, yes.
Okay. And so does that mean if there was a valve that malfunctioned or started leaking, it would have to be somebody from Summit who would need to respond to that incident, and that Burleigh County would not be involved in that process?
Correct.
Okay. So would that mean that Summit would have to have someone very close by to where the leak occurred at the time it occurred, in order to shut off that valve or stop a CO2 leak if it had to be shut off manually?
Yes,
And to your understanding, if there was a leak and it had to be shut off manually, is there anyone else that could do that, who would be trained to do that and authorized to do that other than a Summit employee?
not that I'm aware of.
Turning to communications with Mr. Nearing and you in January of 2024, could you turn to Exhibit 123? Is this a series of emails between you and Mr. Nearing in relation to a meeting involving dispersion modeling in Emmons County?
Yes,
We'll offer Burley County Exhibit 123.
Any objection to 123, Mr. Gort?
No, Your Honor.
Mr. Pelham?
No objection.
123 is received.
And the entry I want to ask you about is on page 6 of that document. An email dated January 17, 2024. There's an entry in there or an email from Mr. Nearing to you dated January 17, 2024. And he says in part, I'm wondering if the courthouse auditorium is the proper venue, ? We could also rent the multi-purpose room at the city building. My only concern is that we may end up with some agitators if we hold it in the auditorium. We had invitees from previous meetings that publicize our invite-only events to the opposition folks and had a significant number of anti-pipeline people there. Your thoughts, ? And what did you understand Mr. Nearing to be referring to there?
just that he wanted to move the venue for, to make it a smaller place.
So that there wouldn't be the possibility of agitators or people opposed to the pipeline present?
Correct.
Did you agree to that?
I did not.
And why not?
Most of the meetings that I have with the responders in Emmons County, we do in the auditorium. It's the basement of the courthouse. The sheriff's department's on the main floor, and that's just where we're used to having our meetings.
Okay. Subsequent to that, did you have a communication with Mr. James Powell of Summit? And specifically, I'm referring to Burley County 125.
Yes,
Okay. That's an email from Mr. Powell to you, and copying in Mr. Bittner and others, including Alex Lang and Rod Dillon from Summit, correct?
yes.
Okay. What we'll offer Burley County 125.
Any objection to 125?
No objection, Your Honor.
Mr. Pelham?
I would object as far as the relevance. I think it's more of the same.
All right, commission's objection is noted. I will admit 125 and the commission can weigh and give this document, or determine what weight to give this document, if any.
And moving through this quickly, the point I want to get to here is the last sentence of Mr. Powell's email to you, where he says the analysis performed by a consultant for the Minnesota PUC is public as part of the draft EIS. Do you see that there?
Yes.
Okay, and is exhibit Burley County 109, to your understanding, a copy of that Minnesota dispersion analysis summit prepared and provided to the PUC in Minnesota?
Yes.
Okay. And Your Honor, I'm going to offer exhibit 109. I know yesterday Mr. Jordy offered certain pages of this document, but I think the entire document should be received.
Any objection to 109, Mr. Glut?
Your Honor, we're objecting to unrelevance. This is something that was filed in Minnesota, has nothing to do with the line in North Dakota or these proceedings in North Dakota.
Mr. Pelham?
Echo my prior objection. Thank you.
All right, I will note the objections. I will admit Appendix G, and again, the PSC can determine what weight, if any, to give this evidence.
And just one final topic I'd like to discuss with you, Ms. Singer, and that is at various points in these emails that we've marked between you and Summit, there's been various requests to keep information secret. There's been requests in there to keep out agitators as described by Mr. Nearing at Summit and other things. In relation to your communications with Summit, as the emergency management director, communicating with them on the Summit pipeline issues, did you feel threatened in any way?
Somewhat.
Okay. And how so?
That essentially the information I'm provided, I can't use to plan and discuss.
Including with the public?
Correct.
Okay. That's all the questions I have.
Great. Mr. Glut, any questions?
Yes, Your Honor, just briefly. Ms. Sanger, I know that the words agitators and protesters or whatever was thrown around, but you were, I believe all these exhibits that were just admitted into evidence demonstrate that if each one of these meetings were confidential and were limited to certain invitees, correct?
I was told it was limited to certain invitees, yes.
So it was not open to the general public.
Correct.
And that was because of due to the sensitive nature of these discussions.
Jack is calling for speculation, no foundation.
She can answer if she knows. I've asked her if she is aware that Alex Lane gave confidentiality admonishments prior to each meeting.
I'll allow her to answer.
It was at the request of Dave Nearing that it be limited to certain people attending.
Okay, and it's your understanding that each one of these meetings was a confidential meeting?
I still considered it a public meeting with confidential information being provided.
Okay, but none of the public was invited to attend?
Correct.
Okay, and just to recap the testimony, within the last year, you've had at least 3 meetings with Summit.
Yes.
You've had numerous correspondence, phone and email with Summit.
To set up the meetings, correct.
And to request information.
Yes.
And Summit has responded to your information.
Yes.
And Summit has went so far as to update you when they knew of a reroute. The map that was admitted into evidence, they sent you a reroute map.
Will you reference which one that was?
I think it's 122.
Yes, Your Honor.
I had requested that.
Okay, and Summit has offered you grants to purchase certain equipment.
Yes.
And all that within about the last year?
The letter was dated May 14th or May 17th for the grant.
Okay. Do you expect there's going to be more communication and involvement with Summit, interaction with Summit regarding emergency management and preparedness?
Yes.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Mr. Pelham, any questions?
Thank you. Good morning, Ms. Sanger. Thanks for being here today. I'm just wondering, in terms of the relationship that your office has with Summit, how would you describe the relationship?
Informational.
And informational in terms of the information that's being provided and requested? Can you elaborate on that?
I'm just trying to get information to provide to the responders who are the tactical component to do the overarching plan.
And as emergency manager for both Burley and Emmons County, have you in the past interacted with companies similar in makeup as Summit related to hazardous pipelines?
Yes.
And in comparison to those informational interactions with those companies, how would you compare the informational interaction between Summit and Burley County?
It was in Emmons County with Dakota Access Pipeline. We met with their safety manager frequently because they had their logistics just south of Linton, but everything we asked for, we received.
And in terms of confidential information, did Energy Transfer Dakota Access provide that to Emmons County when requested?
I don't believe we received anything that was confidential, or they told us we couldn't share it.
You were asked a little bit about the mainline valves in Burley County. I believe there are 5. Have you, or to your knowledge, has there been any discussion as potential for increasing the amount of mainline valves in Burley County?
So initially we were told the valves would be up to 20 miles apart. After that, I haven't received any other information other than through the maps we've received.
The meetings that you attended, Ms. Sanger, were there opportunities for a question and answer time?
Yes.
And did you ask any questions at
Yes.
those meetings? What questions did you ask?
I asked about the effect on animals. And I believe that I asked on the parts per million that would cut off engines.
And did you receive responses to those questions?
The one on the animals, they had never been asked that before. And then the parts per million that would cut off engines, I got a range of parts per million.
As far as the equipment, you were asked whether or not equipment for responding in the event of a line being built and in the event of a leak. Has your department, or have you compiled a list of equipment that Burley County believes it would need?
So early on, after the June meeting, I sent a survey out to the fire departments and responders to see what they would need. I mean, they had no interaction with Summit at this point, so the only thing I got back were gas meters.
And in terms, since having the meetings with Summit, between your office and Summit, are there any more specific equipment needs that have been identified?
I have not received any.
And in terms of training, prior testimony and prior hearings, there's been testimony as to Summit offering training and for emergency first responders to attend training at, I think, at Texas A&M. Are you familiar with that at all?
Yes.
What's your familiarity with that, ma'am?
So Texas A&M is part of a consortium that the Federal Emergency Management Agency works with that provides ongoing training throughout the United States to first responders.
And as far as the opportunity, has it been presented to Burley County for first responders within Burley County to
Yes.
attend training? Yes. And when was that communicated to Burley County or to you? Roughly.
Maybe a month or two ago.
And do you know whether or not there plans for the potential for first responders of Burley County to attend that training?
I sent it to, Bismarck Rural Fire and they indicated they would not be attending.
Did they give a reason?
No.
Anyone within the sheriff's department provided with that information? By your office?
I believe I only sent it to the fire department because it's more tactical on response.
Fair enough. As far as the grant money, it's noted in the notes, I think, from that November meeting that was held, the first meeting. Has there been any specifics as far as the grant money, the $50,000 plus $1,000 per mile of line, proposed line in the county?
No, I just received the May letters indicating that that will be available.
As far as the information that's been provided by the company, what additional information do you believe as emergency management director in Burley County and Emmons County is necessary to adequately prepare first responders in Emmons and Burley County?
I'm not tactical again. That's the first responders.
Fair
So
enough.
whatever they need as far as the dispersion modeling, based on North Dakota temperatures, wind speed, things like that, so they can develop their response strategies.
And I appreciate that response, ma'am. It's specific though, what do you believe is lacking from the company in providing to Burley County or Emmons County at this time?
Well, certainly the final route, what the shutoff valves mean, what we can provide to the public, things of that nature.
Anything else specifically?
If the responders want additional information as far as what they need for their tactical response, that's what we would request.
And as far as the responders specific, does the communication between the company and the responders come through your office, or is that from the company to the specific responders agency, such as the sheriff's department or rural fire department?
To my office, and then I filter it out.
Okay. But as far as the equipment, my understanding, your testimony, you correct me if I'm wrong, is breathing apparatuses. Is there anything else equipment wise?
The only response I got when I initially sent the survey out in June was gas monitors. We haven't surveyed again yet, but
Fair enough.
with the grant availability, we certainly will.
Thank you for your testimony, ma'am. I don't have any other questions for you.
All right, Mr. Jordy, I plan to break for lunch around noon. Do you have questions for Ms. Singer? And if you do, can you finish before then?
Yes, yes, and yes. Okay, ma'am, I think you testified that first responders don't touch valves. Is it your understanding you have to wait for Summit to get there or hope their remote system works properly?
Or their first response team, yes.
And there was some discussion about PHMSA requiring an emergency response plan. Do you understand that the PHMSA regulations only apply to the company, that the company has to have a company developed emergency response plan that it's going to utilize for its employees and others? Are you aware of that?
Yes.
So you understand that there's no PHMSA restriction that prohibits Burley County from doing its own emergency response plan. Are you aware of that?
Correct.
And in order for you to do an emergency response plan on the first of its kind, highly pressurized hazardous CO2 pipeline that could confront your citizens and their safety, wouldn't you agree that it would be important for you to have the very best and most detailed information Summit has?
Correct.
And so the county cannot properly discharge its duties to protect the welfare and safety of its citizens, the assets in the community, without that detailed information, because otherwise you're essentially just going on the internet and trying to figure it out yourself, right?
The information is needed for the responders to help develop the emergency response plan.
Okay, there was comment from Mr. Dom, apparently to you or in your presence about misinformation, concerned about information, but would you agree, ma'am, that if the summit data that they're refusing to provide publicly was simply just provided out to the public, then there couldn't be misinformation because we'd all have the same data, correct?
Correct.
And would you agree that the only thing that occurs by keeping this sensitive and important and safety-related information out of the citizens' hand is to reduce the likelihood that the citizens can criticize the pipeline company and also thwarts emergency planning efforts locally?
Objection calls for speculation.
I agree. I'm going to sustain that objection.
Okay. Well, in her personal opinion, which obviously gets over a speculation objection, that's my question. Does she believe it?
It would seem so. I mean, knowledge is power, whether you're a responder or a citizen.
And then you were asked what is missing, but would you agree, unless you have the very best and most detailed data to understand the risks and challenges, it's practically impossible for you or those under your purview to know what is missing in terms of what they might need in emergency response, right?
Correct.
And are you aware, ma'am, that PHMSA has no jurisdiction on the location, routing, or siting of a CO2 pipeline? Are you aware of that?
Yes.
And are you aware that safety concerns and factors related to safety can be considered by the PSC in making its ultimate decision here?
Yes.
Objection calls for legal conclusion.
Thank you. I don't have anything further.
I agree that last answer will be considered as Ms. Singer's opinion only. Mr. Jordy, did you say no further questions?
Yes, I did.
Okay. Commissioner Chrisman, any questions?
One of the exhibits showed the number of the valves placement in Burley County. 5, I believe it was. Is the point of that, should I take that to mean that you believe that's too few or that they're improperly spaced?
It depends on the topography, but the valves don't, when you close one valve, that doesn't mean it closes the product. It's a sequential closure of the valves.
Okay, but for Burley County specifically and your topography, do you feel that there needs to be more or that they're improperly spaced?
I think spacing would be a little bit closer is preferred, of course.
So it's not that they're in the wrong spot. You believe that there's not enough of them.
Correct.
What do you think is the right number or the right spacing?
I'm not tactical, so I can't answer that.
But just that this is too few.
Right.
Okay. And when you talk about emergency response plans, you're talking about, I presume it's not about what if one person at this residence calls in and says they need an ambulance, but you're talking about bigger things, correct?
Correct.
Like, and that could be boats capsizing, large boats capsizing, fires, terrorism, all kinds of things, right?
Correct.
And so the fire people would make up emergency response plans for fire related equipment, and ambulance people make up their ER plans and like that, or do you oversee all of those?
I will tell you an emergency operations plan says who does what, not how they do it. That lies in the responder agency's specific operating plans. That's their tactical information.
Okay, and are any of those things confidential?
Our flood annex is on the websites, and that says specific, that plan is an annex, so it says specifically who does what when, and that's on our website.
What about like with terrorism related things? Do you lay it all out exactly how, who would respond in what ways to large facilities like this, or a hospital, or a school, or the civic center? Or is some of that confidential?
That's all with the emergency responders. That is not part of an emergency operations plan.
Do they make it public?
That I'm not sure.
I thought I had one more, but I can't think of it. So.
All right, Commissioner Haugenhofer?
Hi, Mary.
Hi.
I'm gonna ask some of the same questions just for clarification. As Burley County Emergency Manager, do you feel you have received the most current map of the new proposed road?
When I request it, I receive it. So my last request and the last map I have, I'm assuming is the most recent map.
Okay, and who provided that to you?
I think I just got one in April or May, and I'm not sure who I got that from.